welcome to another episode of a Tenity podcast. Today is a very special day as we're taking a tour around the globe and taking a closer look at our newest hub in Tallinn, Estonia. And what better way to introduce our hub and the country than to talk about startups, something we know and love. So today we are diving into the Estonian ecosystem, covering the 6C framework. So customers, capital, compliance, competency, communication, and culture. Today we're focusing on the first three, so customers, capital, compliance. These are the areas that make Estonia a great incubator for startups, and this way also we have another excuse to have a follow-on episode. But before we jump in, a quick hi from myself. I'm Liisa. I work in the Tallinn hub as an investment associate. So anything related to deal flow, DM me, hit me up. I will be your go-to person. And I also have here my two colleagues, Uve and Kevin.
Hey.
Hello. Introduce myself as well. So my name is Uwe. I am the head of operations for the Tallinn hub of Tenity, and I oversee our acceleration program and overall business development efforts.
And I'm Kevin, leading the VC activities of Tenity Nordics. I'm also participating quite a bit in the acceleration program, but dealing mainly with startup selection, startup investments, and portfolio management for the Tenity Nordic hub.
Why I think it's Uwe and Kevin are such a great balance. So Kevin is not from Estonia, so he has a very unique perspective to the ecosystem here and can kind of compared to others. He's been living in Denmark, Spain, and the US. And Uwe's been in this space for over a decade, so I think it'll be an interesting chat.
I guess that's one thing I forgot to mention, that I am French and I am adopted by Estonians for the last 10 years. I've been moving around quite a bit as well. Indeed, thanks Liisa for the intro.
Yeah, no worries. We're filling the gaps here. But anyways, let's jump in. So Estonia, number one in the world for unicorns per capita, number one in Europe for startups per capita. We're a small nation. Somehow we have managed to kind of grow or incubate a lot of good tech companies. It seems a bit paradoxical. So especially if we analyze it from the ecosystem perspective and look at the customers. So in your experience, Uwe and Kevin, what advantages does our size offer for startups, particularly in fintech?
It's a good point. I don't know, maybe I go first. I actually had a conversation. I was at Tech Barbecue last week, speaking with a bunch of Icelandic companies and discussing the Icelandic landscape, et cetera, and it came to my mind that actually Estonia has, very similar features as the Icelandic landscape, where the market is small enough for people to somewhat know one another, which makes it sound like a great spot for, incubating, in a sense that people with whom you can work on POC and test out principles. And I think that's one strength that I've noticed. I've been worked a little bit all around, that Estonian community is very homogeneous. So people, first of all, know one another, but they know whom to reach out and always know somebody who can help them out one way or another. So I think it creates very natural and organic momentums for testing things out.
Yeah, that's something that I can certainly agree with. And I think it also goes a bit further because the same tight relationships that we have, it also allows for the country to regulate for new business models. So there is this certain spirit of innovation that is also very much in the minds of civil servants. And if you look at the Estonian success story overall, then what I think is discussed not that much is the overall age of the political and civil service elite. And that goes back to the 90s. So when Estonia set itself free from the Soviet shackles, then there was also a change of guard in the civil and state sector. So everybody who came to power, they were much more open-minded, potentially digitally more savvy, and understood the potential that IT can have, not just for civil service and how to digitize government solutions, even though that was the driving force at the time, but then more broadly for the economy as well.
And I understand that political shift happened in the mid-90s, right? I heard stories of meetings being held in saunas where, engineers and young decision makers would be discussing on how can we make the country a better place. And since it was the early days of internet, I think it was a pretty hot topic, right? for introducing all of these mechanisms in a deeper level of society, political decision making, administration, etc. Right?
Mm-hmm. But how do you feel? I mean, being a tight-knit community, this also means Estonian companies have to think globally from the beginning, right? How do you feel this mindset is embodied in our companies? And, with the great, Skype effect, how has kind of the different generations of entrepreneurship, like how has it changed or evolved over time here?
So one way to look at it is that having a small market size means that you need to start selling outside of your home yard, so to speak, and then you immediately have to clear a few extra hurdles. Like the threshold for having a strong value proposition, I would say, is a little bit greater. So there is the fact that everybody has to start thinking along the lines of export immediately, and that's kind of old news. But I think why it makes for robust startups is exactly the ability to clear higher obstacles from the get-go.
And I would even bring something very basic and simple. I was actually having a portfolio meeting with one of our companies earlier today, and they were showcasing their platform, which is currently selling only to Estonians, and the entirety of the platform was in English. And it might sound totally normal for us living in Estonia, but having worked in different countries, having from day one an MVP platform in English already showcases the mindset and the readiness to which the founders are into targeting new markets. There are obviously logical steps moving forward, sometimes starting with Scandinavia or the Baltic countries, but from day one, all the materials, whether it is the platform itself or the agreements, the shareholders agreement or whatsoever, are already set for international buildup, whether it is from investment perspective or go-to-market strategy, right? And I think that's actually something we tend to forget, but we're blessed with that one here in Estonia.
Do you maybe have some other great examples of how our ecosystem, can be leveraged to test and scale products? I mean, you've both been in this game for a while, so some practical kind of ideas.
So I would say that the most famous case would be Bolt, formerly known as Taxify. And if you think about how they came to be, I mean, they came in the wake of Uber, and both Uber and Bolt were lobbying the Estonian state to enable their business models from a legal perspective. And the state heard them out, made the required amendments, and that ultimately gave a very sort of firm footing for Bolt to have its headquarters here in Estonia and set a very strong precedent. Uber also benefited from it, from the regulatory clarity that the European Union member state all of a sudden started to provide. But as a homegrown Uber or sort of Bolt has gone on to become a super successful company in many of the markets that Uber wouldn't serve in the beginning.
Yeah, and I mean, Kevin, from your perspective, you worked in the States and Denmark. Do you see any, clear differences in the startups at an early stage?
I mean, again, like I mentioned earlier, I think the proximity of the people, the homogeneity of the people, and the size of the ecosystem is very good for early on momentum creation. I mean, if I bring the example of successful founders, whether it is Bold founders, whether it is Pipedrive founders, these are the kind of guys that you can actually see hanging out in the same place as brand new founders, right? And that's not only very inspirational, but it also gives an access that success is not something outside of your scope, right? If I take the example of France, for an average person living in the capital or anywhere around the country, having access to this high-class entrepreneur level is nearly impossible. You either have to have the right connection, been to the right business school or whatsoever here. But in Estonia, things are way more homogeneous, and you can actually get insights, and you can even get funding from peer founders who have successfully moved forward. There is plenty we could say about how SBAN is very active in Estonia and how SBAN is actually, playing a role in every single community, even that we have. They're hanging around with us all the time. And that creates this synergy and this natural incentive of moving forward and growing as a society and leveraging the society rather than doing things independently. And I think that's where I see the main core differences with other markets I've worked upon.
Yeah, I love that you brought in the capital aspect, important for any startup's growth. How would you describe the VC or angel investment scene in Estonia in general?
once more will bring me back to the point of the community size, for the simple reason that Estonia has, people say it's a small VC and investor community, but it seems to actually be a lot of people proportionally to the 1.3 million people living in Estonia. But the interesting part of that is that we all know each other. We all spend time together over the weekend. We all saw each other at the same event. So we build this very tightly knit community that is great for deal flow perspective, but it's also great from a portfolio management perspective. And I'm coming to another point here, is that because the community is so tight, you develop somewhat more personal relationships, both with co-investors, but also with startup you are working with. So that leads you into very natural incentive of collaboration, which I think is very healthy. But it also puts another perspective to it. And I was actually thinking about it today, is that in Estonia, because we all know each other and words are running out real quick in the community, the reputation is key. So people have to take that into account, and they have to play as a whole, right? And they have to play ethically in that game. Otherwise, things are being hurt, and it can be, pretty negative on the long run, right? So I think that's one of the two criterias that I think are very relevant compared to more fragmented ecosystem like the US or like France or even Denmark. Even Denmark is a slightly smaller ecosystem. It works really well in peer with Norway, Iceland, and Sweden. Estonia has this very closed-up community that allows for very ethical relationship between actors.
Yeah, I mean, Uwe, you've been on the startup side as well. So how do you perceive the Estonian investor community, both angel and venture capital and forward? How could we improve things?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, I would say that the operators and the founders, they need to be very good at relationship management. I mean, that's a rule of thumb for investor relations anyway. But oftentimes, I think founders don't really understand the need to really develop the relationships. And one of the, I think, cultural faults that we have is this general ability to say thank you. So whenever somebody's done you a favor, I mean, of course, people understand this idea of gratitude, but there is something shy about many Estonians where they're not completely capable of sending a proper thank you note after an evening out or whatever, and that a relationship building skill is something that founders just need to have, and they need to understand that cold outreach does typically not lead to investments immediately, but they can lead to investments 6 to 12 months down the road, as long as they're good about sending out their investor newsletters. So this is an aspect of culture that I think in English-speaking countries is just much more natural to people. And by the same token, I think there is a little more improvement needed in the culture of introductions. So, the Estonian community in the startup land is very much ready to give back, but not everybody kind of gets it. There are also people who, in their mindset, are a bit perhaps more transactional and don't cherish this idea of quite openly, opening up their network to early stage founders. And then, of course, everybody has to be mindful of who they introduce. But I think we have more to accomplish here.
And do you think
Now,
that? Sorry,
yeah.
go. I was going to ask, bouncing back on what you're saying. Do you think that the point that you brought on, maybe not, giving back, or I mean, I'm not sure how you put it back, but the idea is that, do you think it's related to the Estonian culture of being very straightforward and straight to the point, the transactional aspect of relationship?
Not really, because I don't think the Estonians are overall that transactional. Because of the small size that you described, you actually have to be relationship oriented. But I think it's more of an industry question. So in the startup VC land, making introductions is already quite standard. But the moment you go out into more traditional sectors, then it's more complicated to land your introductions there. And that is maybe the adjacent areas is where we should be helping startups more to take 30 minutes to hear them out. Maybe you know that you will not be buying from said company anytime soon, but share your expertise, share your perspectives, your skepsis, and a fellow entrepreneur or founder will do that easily, but maybe the average banker won't do it.
Okay, fair enough. That's a good point. It's one thing I'm trying to bring on as well with our VC connections at Tenity. I'm making some intros from early stage companies that might not be a fit for certain investors, But that's clear. All I want is to bring my peers' expertise onto bringing additional value to our startups, right? And that's what I'm indeed trying to extract from VC peers. I understand that everybody has a schedule, etc. But when I'm being asked to bring in my expertise and my views, bringing a third party view can sometimes be very much useful to conceptualizing things differently. And I think that you're touching a point here is that we maybe should push that on the Estonian level as well.
Yeah,
But
very
then,
good point.
yeah, just wanted to continue on the point of capital, actually. So I was now talking about introductions as a kind of a cultural thing, but capital-wise, when it comes to availability, I would say that in Estonia, packs a punch. And since Skype exited, and then the Estonian Development Fund was initially set up to match venture capital investments with the private sector, then that was a really good kickstart to the venture capital market in Estonia. And things have developed in rather healthy fashion. So SmartCap, as the sovereign wealth fund or fund investor, is very active in providing cornerstone facilities to venture capital funds. So it's really going well. But on the other hand, I would say that we do lack capital for later stage investments, and part of it is easy to explain. It's just the factor of how large an economy Estonia has and what, let's say, restrictions local pension funds, insurance funds would have in making investments. Just limited physical capital that is available. So that's one thing that has to be fixed. And from a fintech perspective, I would also say that alternative lenders and anybody with an asset-heavy business model, they would typically have a hard time raising money because they could go to, let's say, family offices and real money investors, but that requires a great degree of trust, and that's not something that a well lubricated capital market runs on. So there should be institutional capital available for debt funding as well. And generally speaking, the state does have Enterprise Estonia, and there are certain instruments available for, let's say, on lending purposes to consumer lenders, but hardly ever to the alternative ones. So it's more for the licensed entities who, to be honest, don't need that type of funding, these instruments. So what would be interesting is if the Estonian state were to make debt capital more available to these alternative lenders, as long as their business models are fine. And that would not only improve access to debt funding for, let's say, SMEs and the development of these companies, but I think it would also ultimately drive digital innovation because if these companies with new interesting business models are able to attract their liquidity from Estonia, then that sets them up for success to enter other markets in the future.
Yeah, definitely food for thought here. You quickly touched upon, and also previously, discussing the customer base, mentioned, Estonia as a society, but as a country, and our government has a lot of great initiatives and has been really forward-minded in terms of like developing entrepreneurship and helping startups. We have programs like Urgency and Accelerate Estonia. How do you feel these programs have shaped the ecosystem, and especially in terms of supporting founders? What type of opportunities do these initiatives give them? At Tenity, we have many e-residency companies in our portfolio, and making these founders really feel immersed here is something very, very close to our hearts. So I would love to get your take on what these initiatives, what part they play.
I think it's important to new listeners. I mean, again, it's old news, but Estonia has been particularly innovative in streamlining every single processes of its administrative setup, from tax reporting to company creation to license issuance or whatsoever. And I feel, again, coming from somewhere else, that the Estonian mindset has been crafted at the very early stage to already be entrepreneurial, in a sense that most of the administrative burden and barriers are somewhat being removed from the psyche of people, allowing for quick decision making and the decision of being entrepreneur in general. A lot more people have companies here. A lot more people are not being stopped by the administrative burden of creating companies. And that does not only go from the start of creating a company, but also later down the line, where absolutely every single administrative points of company management are essentially being addressed by an easy to use infrastructure, which is the e-society, the e-Estonia that we have all heard about, right? And once more, I think that's a very basic point, but it plays a big role in the local mindset and perception of entrepreneurship, if you know what I'm trying to say here. Now, when it comes to day-to-day basis, anything related to tax, legal work, or whatsoever is essentially one click away on the internet. So that pushes for efficiency, basically no bureaucracy, and obviously a system that lays any kind of tools for anybody to be an entrepreneur, right? But I think that generally speaking, to answer your question, I think it's just the cradle to which people are being raised upon is just suitable for creating entrepreneurs. Does it mean that there is only good businesses? Absolutely not. But at least it creates a wider pool of options to create good businesses.
Yeah, so the starting point is there, and it's a good one. Oh, wait, sorry, you wanted to elaborate on what Kevin said?
Yeah, so precisely building on what Kevin said, right? So we now have Estonian entrepreneurs, whether they're startup entrepreneurs or operating in more traditional businesses or even just as freelancers, it's very easy, very efficient to set up a legal entity here and start operations without having to think about where you get the capital for your equity payment and all the bureaucracy that goes with forming a new business. Now, where it's interesting is the e-residency angle. So now all the same, let's say, solopreneurs, small businesses, they're able to come and set up shop here. But there is a lot of untapped potential in two further directions, and one of them is the general idea of Estonia serving as the Delaware of Europe. So in the States, it's clear where you set up a legal entity. Typically, it's Delaware. The regime is very familiar. The case law is also very reliable, and courts are efficient. So Europe, if you think about it, lacks that kind of go-to destination. And Estonia has now, made several steps in the right direction by not only enabling the administrative part in digital ways, but also in standardizing the legal documents that have to do with new company formation and raising funding for early stage companies. So this is an incredible step forward, and I think many European startups should be tapping into that already kind of mature product a bit more. The fact that you can bring investors in through an e-notary, that means you don't have to spend too much funds on physically going back and forth, let alone mailing documents. So there's a lot that is going on there, and I think it will continue to grow aggressively. And then the untapped part, I would say, is Estonia becoming not the Luxembourg of Europe. Europe already has a Luxembourg, but a Luxembourg of the world. So in other words, to have a jurisdiction where you can administer a fund in a cost-efficient manner, there is high demand for that. Of course, Estonia as a country has to raise its profile and reliability, and it takes decades to become a trusted legal environment for the LPs of the world. But it is completely within Estonia's kind of realm of possibility to start with smaller funds, with regional funds, offering fund administration services to bring in the capital and run it out of Estonia. So these are the two kind of exciting areas how Estonia can become more of a venture capital hub.
And I think Estonia has already done, pretty much all the heavy lifting. I mean, I remember a conversation in France or Spain 10 years ago where basically no one really knew anything about Estonia, but now you speak to any form of young entrepreneurs and they already heard or know that Estonia is the place to be for whether startup incorporation or even, startup lifestyle. And I'm not only speaking about startup in the end of the day, but entrepreneurs in general, right? I think Estonia has picked up real well on that end. And again, there is a huge reputational aspect to how Estonia will go forward and has gone so far, in the sense that it's not qualified anymore as an Eastern post-Soviet country in the mind of entrepreneurs. At the beginning, it was, right? But Estonia has managed to, detach itself from that perspective and somewhat managed not to end up in too many scandals that made the country look sketchy. There was the Danske Bank scandal at some point, but I think that the country has managed to, get itself out of that situation. But generally speaking, I think all the heavy lifting with regards to building that reputation and becoming the startup center of Europe and potentially the world already pretty far on, right? And the closeness to Scandinavia, which is also pretty well connected when it comes to startups, with the Slush, the Tech Barbecue, Latitude 59 being quite of a hub. If you look proportionally, that's where the magic happens to a certain extent in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think looking at, soft power and soft power, different researches, the ease of doing business and that's an aspect of life that plays a really huge part actually in a country's brand, and Estonia has definitely had great strides in this for sure. But now looking to the future a bit, with different new EU regulations like the AI Act, MICA, that really are about to change startup world, at least in some aspects. What is the future of the Estonian startup ecosystem, especially when looking at fintech?
So I would say that there are European Union-wide regulations that apply more or less equally to startups operating in all the member states. And with the AI Act, for example, I mean, you need this space to be regulated because AI tools are very potent, and used the wrong way, they can cause a lot of harm. But there is always the question of how much will it hinder innovation among early stage companies who would have a difficult time complying with maintaining all the registries, hiring the right people. Usually, compliant people need to be pretty competent and are therefore quite expensive to hire. So that can hold back innovation across Europe, including Estonia, unfortunately. But then when it comes to fintech in particular, I would say that Estonia, as the hub for regulated fintechs who would like to set up their legal entities here and obtain the license from the local financial supervisory authority, there is a lot of potential in there as well. But one should not for a second mistake Estonia for a country where you can easily obtain a license. So the Estonian regulator is considered firm but fair, especially after a couple of scandals with Danske Bank and crypto assets being traded too frivolously here. So as long as the company has transparent financiers, reputable directors, and is also willing to serve the Estonian market, then it's a very good jurisdiction to obtain a licensing and passport it elsewhere. But you really need to meet these criteria.
Yeah, I mean, I agree mostly with what Uwe says. I don't think I hold a bowl made out of crystal, so I'm not sure whether I even have the expertise or knowledge on those topics. But what I sense and what I see is actually a lot of AI company building AI solution to regulate compliance AI, if you see what I mean, right? Bunch of companies are using AI to control AI, and that creates somewhat a form of RegTech bubble that is pretty interesting to witness. And I think that even in our portfolio we have companies dealing with such kind of topic. And from a fintech perspective, generally speaking, I think the AI itself as speeding up the entire bureaucratic problematic of giant corporate companies is just becoming a thing nowadays. Whether it's in Estonia or in Scandinavia or all around the world, I think it's more of a general trend. Once more, Estonia is pushing for ease of doing business here. So for those who know, they'll just do it here.
And speaking of areas of growth, what I see as a key one, especially considering the Estonian kind of assets, is cybersecurity. So there are a few reasons why that would be the case. Like on the one hand, we already have a pretty robust EID system, and that in turn is built on kind of a long history of cryptography and understanding of information security. But then on top of that, Estonia has also been the target of many hacker attacks, mainly originating from the east. And our systems have generally proven to be fairly strong, not impenetrable, but good enough. And ultimately, however, it means that there is a lot of expertise here when it comes to cybersecurity and building the underlying infrastructure for that as well, and seeing how these attacks, whether it's ransomware attacks, state actors going after financial system targets, electricity system targets, and so forth. There is a critical amount of experience and know-how to build the next generation of cybersecurity solutions out of Estonia.
I mean, building on top of that, if I'm not wrong, NATO's cybersecurity headquarters are actually located in Estonia, correct?
There's the Center of Excellence for NATO here, and the European Union also has its large-scale IT information systems headquarters in Tallinn. So it's really a perfect breeding ground.
Yeah, okay. And I understand, it's maybe a different topic, but the Soviet time Estonian expertise was actually already back in the days in the tech engineers, space technology, actually. So I think all of this brings everything back into a block, yeah?
Yeah, there is, let's say, a long history of strong STEM education, including the cryptography and computer sciences bit that I told you about. So that has already trained a few generations of very competent people in the field.
Uwe, Kevin, any last words from your part?
I would say that, again, I've been thinking a lot about comparing Estonia with places that I've worked and different communities and different environment. And in the end of the day, it's such a combination of historical factors, socio-economical factor, and just being, it's exactly like a business, right? Being at the right place at the right time and just building on top. And I think Estonia has, generally speaking, been very good at catching on those opportunities and somewhat surfing that wave, while being amazing at marketing, because let's not lie to ourselves, Estonian landing pages are just one of the most amazing public domains you can find on the internet. And I advise anybody to check it out. Even their font is amazing. But I think my last word is just looking at how Estonia conducts public businesses into privately thought through methodology, if that makes any sense, right?
Absolutely. Uwe.
Yes. Well, I would just want to conclude the discussion here by engendering another aspect of Estonian entrepreneurial culture, which is the mentality of failing fast and failing forward. And one of the greatest exports when it comes to internet memes that Estonia has come up with is this idea of sometimes losing but always winning. So may that be the spirit that guides us and all the fellow entrepreneurs who build on Estonia.
Yeah, well, that's the good spot to end everything at. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.